discuss with some people that you don't know. What we're going to do is to start off by showing you a little clip that will tell you a little bit about what STIR does, and then we'll explain it a bit. But the aim of this session is that we'll talk about our approach to scaling, and through that, hopefully raise some questions and get you thinking about how you might scale ideas that you have, and think about taking them to large scale to have the impact that you want to have. We should say we're actually very blessed today, ladies and gentlemen, because we have one of the stars of this video, Sajid, in this very room, so look out for him. He's there. Hopefully you'll be able to hear. It's fine.
Story of teachers who are trying to create low-cost and high-impact classrooms to improve the level of education in primary schools.
Well, let me not sure pretty now brings us a story of an NGO that's gotten together a group of 25 innovators to revamp the system.
Small changes can make a big difference, and this madrasa in Singapore, East Delhi, is a perfect example. Despite severe financial constraints, Sarath Jeevan, the principal of his school, has innovated to improve the quality of education. For one, he takes videos of teachers teaching so that they can watch themselves and improve. Yet another innovation is that teachers here use a simple mobile phone to teach once.
With the help of these methods, they have made tremendous growth. Not only academic growth, their confidence has also grown.
The school bag of these kids are a little lighter as they don't use any textbooks here. Teachers use innovative techniques to teach these kids, but they are the only ones. STIR Education have chosen around 25 of these micro-innovators. At this primary school in the same area, Sharma is yet another innovator. He keeps a tab on all 450 kids in the school every day, as teachers are required to file a daily report.
All over 450 students and kids के parents सबको try करवाते हैं.
ये कौन है, नया कहाँ से आ गया है? Just like that. The schools run by Sarath Jeevan and Sharma have been identified by the NGO STIR Education. It identifies innovation in schools to spread these ideas further.
And ultimately, we would hope that we could actually work with teachers in other countries. It could spread throughout the world.
They have selected 25 teachers and are training them to innovate further.
So they are telling us how to put our ideas across, जिनसे हमें लगता है कि हम अपने स्कूल को और बढ़िया कर सकते हैं.
STIR aims to reach over 1,000 innovators, and their hope is that over 5 million children will indirectly benefit. In New Delhi, Meenakshi Griffin.
Oh, it's restart. So, hopefully you got a sense from the film what we're trying to do with STIR. As you know, access to education throughout the developing world has shot up over the last 20 years. In India, I think the latest figures, technically, I think 97-98% of kids now have access to a free secondary school. But like in lots of other parts of the world, the quality of the education being provided has not kept pace with that rapid expansion. Our belief at STIR is that what we think is that the best way to improve that system is, rather than come in and impose top-down big programs, we're trying to find the good stuff, what some people call the bright spots, and we call micro-innovations, that are already in the system, and create an infrastructure, create pathways for those teacher or principal-led ideas to actually get to scale. And we think that there are a few key pathways for those to get to scale, which we'll talk about in a second. But before we do that, Sarath is going to talk a little about some of the principles that we've heard people think about when they talk about scaling.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, the question of scale is ridiculous anyway. But, 1.2 million schools, just under about 300 million children in schools here, right up to the estimates vary, but almost 8 million teachers in the country across both the government and the affordable spaces. So scale is a very ambitious topic, first of all, anyway. But still, we're also trying to see how can we take this internationally to other countries. We're looking at Kenya sometime over the next couple of years as well to launch and try the approach in East Africa. So scale is really the heart of what we're trying to do. It's one of the things we wrestle with the most. We've learnt a lot. Still figuring some of this out, so I hope this will be more a dialogue and a chance to get ideas as well for us. But I think two things that really seem to separate people. We talk to partners, funders, our board and so on. Two views of how scale can happen. One is, I guess, what I'd call a mechanistic view. So I guess if you have to summarize that in the teaching force, it's probably a view which says, look, teachers in general aren't, fully qualified. I think Ashish yesterday was quoting, Ashish Dewan was quoting stats. I think only 15% of teachers have passed the entry test. Formally, for example, the only option is to really make it so really embed it really in the fabric of what a school does. So it's kind of idiot-proof, really. There's no way for a teacher to mess it up. That's one view of the world. It's very mechanistic. The other view is a more people-based approach that says, ultimately the only way to do this, teaching is a human, it's a service industry basically, as is education. The only way you can make the change happen is to empower teachers, make them more developed, improve their capability, confidence, motivation. Two quite different schools of thought. And maybe just in your groups, just for 2 minutes, which of those two schools would you subscribe to? Just 2 minutes of discussion. Which of it do you believe that you need to look at this mechanistically, as in try and make it really wire it in, make it very hard to not do something? Or do you believe that actually the way to do this is to empower teachers, empower them as individuals? Okay, 2 minutes of discussion. But the school is penalised financially for that. So a mechanistic approach would be saying that let's try and change it from the point of view of change it such that it's mandatory for every teacher to show the books to the kids, for example. And you could probably do some stuff with policy so that you can change that depreciation law. So you really wire it into the teacher's behaviour day by day. That's one way to change it. What we saw a lot of schools doing was just getting around this by saying, okay, this is a constraint. Let's reconfigure the school day now. This is crazy, the books are coming, someone's buying them, but kids aren't using them. Configure the school day so that every child has access to books. So we're going to change the school day such that a teacher will be in a reading room for the whole day. And every kid will spend an hour of supervised reading. They'll actually have a teacher helping them, supporting them as well. So two sort of, one approach is very much trying to really wire it into the system. The other approach is to almost see if you can empower teachers to find creative solutions themselves. Is that a helpful definition? So just on that basis, mechanistic, use 1, 2, okay. And I presume that the rest, and then the human elements. Okay, most people, who's on the fence? Okay, quite a few.
We actually thought it should be both.
Okay, tell me more about both.
Well, because one is with the mechanistic approach, I assume that it requires a period of time. If you're going to wire people's, or get people to operate in a certain way, it takes time. And then, in the meantime, what do you do? Surely you could have that movement and network.
Good. Any other further thoughts on that?
I also think that it should be a combination because I definitely think if you want to be a game changer, you have to address the systemic issues.
Yeah.
So you have to have a mechanistic strategy.
Yeah.
In the meantime, you do need to address various micro issues and have, sort of localized or smaller programs in place in order to sort of penetrate.
Yeah, good point. Yes.
We talked about how a long-term vision needs to be for human change, but that you might use to create that change mechanism.
Interesting. So actually, between the 3 points, we almost have 2 different sequencing. I think we're all saying the same thing about the combination. But one view is you could actually try to, while it takes time to change policy, you can try and get teachers directly to do this. Another view says you put the mechanism in early, and then hope over time to change teacher mindsets, for example. We're trying to figure this out. We'll come back to this question at the end. But it's interesting, we've been a bit like President Obama in his first election. People have seen different things in us as STIR as well. And I think the two camps seem to see, one camp likes this idea of an ideas factory. We find ideas, we then put them out there, disseminate them so teachers can take them on. The second seems to be much more interested in us as creating this community, a teacher mindset piece. And we're still trying to grapple with the right combination. We'll come back to this in a second. But I wanted to go through some thinking we've been doing on how we get ideas to scale. And they probably combine those elements in different ways, and again, we'll come back to that. There's partnerships as a way to get scale. This is the idea of creating networks, which James will talk about, and the idea of creating platforms to create scale. And this is assuming, by the way, you're a small organization. So it doesn't apply to government, which already has scale, for example. So if you're trying to influence the system from outside, how do you try and get your idea to scale as well? What I'm going to do is just use an example for each of these. And on partnerships with STIR, what we've been trying to do is act as a bit of a broker really between the ideas. So we've been going to places like schools like Sarath School, looking for really good innovators, good innovative ideas. You saw a few in the video, a few examples in the video. And we're also working on the demand side to create a big demand from partners. So in a few months, we've got about 40 partners across India and also internationally now who are interested in taking ideas, embedding them in their work, taking the scale in some way. What we found actually, in terms of a framework for how that might happen, there have been a few kind of what we call pathways to scale through partnership. So assuming partners are a channel, a few different ways of doing that. So you touch on the policy change piece. We could work to influence government policy at a macro HRD level. We've had good discussions with the ministry. It could be state level. It could also, frankly, be, with that Bombay example, it's very practical implementation policy. It's district official, district level stuff as well. So a lot of different levels of policy we could try to influence. There's NGO scale-up, so a lot of our partners are NGOs. We have Prathan, Bharti, Teach for India, etc. So they have a lot of schools. We reckon our 40 partners have about between 50 and 100,000 schools between them in India that they operate in or run. So we can encourage them to embed those ideas. We could try and encourage the idea of social entrepreneurship, for example, getting one of our innovators to say, I want to set up an organization that will take those ideas to scale. So Saj is actually thinking along those lines about training of schools. We can try and create a product out of them. So, for example, it might be that well, we'll go to an example in a second, actually. So creating a product or service that could then be scaled and distributed either for free or for a charge. We could put it up there, so online or mobile, some channel to get teachers to directly access it. And then we can try and infiltrate the teacher training systems, the ways that training systems happen either pre-service or in service. Does anyone have questions on this sort of framework? Have we missed anything, first of all?
Can you just go back to the product?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, what would a good example be of? So we've got a great, one of my innovators come up with what we call a student letterbox. And one of the most viral ideas. So what they do is they put a letterbox physically in the classroom. They encourage kids to write letters to teachers. It does two things. One is it improves literacy, but also it reduces the distance between teacher and pupil, which is a big problem in India because of social class and so on. So that could be, we could literally create a product, create a physical letterbox and just ship it out to every school in the country. We could encourage a big toy education company to actually create a product and sell it to schools. And we could just give it to them and help them to distribute it, for example. So that's the kind of productization example in a nutshell. So what I want you to do is to work on a real example. This is another one of our innovators who isn't here today. Her name is Alice. She's got a great, she was profiled in The Economist a few months ago. She got a really interesting approach to teacher development. She finds many kids in her school, a very poor school in East Delhi, just can't concentrate. They're first generation learners, parents haven't been to school, a lot of behavioral issues. Those kids are sucking up time in the classroom from other kids. And so what she's asked her teachers to do is to go and write case studies on each child. Someone called it the Harvard Business School approach to so getting to write a 2-page case study based on a home visit and what they see day in, day out in classrooms. And she gets the teachers to sit down once a week, roughly, and discuss the case studies and approaches to dealing with those kids and how they're going to adapt the teaching and different strategies to reduce those problems. It's been very successful in the school at reducing the instance of behavior very, very well. Now, assume we found this great teacher innovator. The framework up here. How would you take Alice's idea to scale? Does that make sense? So is the idea clear to everyone? Any questions on the idea itself? The framework, and any questions on any of these sort of pathways? All good? Okay, so 5 minutes in groups again. And obviously you can do a lot of things, but what are the top 2 or 3 things you could do that would really take it to scale? Imagine 1.3 million schools across the country. How many could you get to, and how would you do it as a result? Okay? Okay, but I think let's just get everyone together again. So last few seconds. Any volunteers for sharing some examples? Guys, just so any examples of? Do you guys want to start from there? What's your idea? So tell us. So what are the top two or three things you might do for Alice's idea?
Okay. Well, we were just thinking about various ways on engaging teachers as well as students, and one of the topics of discussion that came up was, let's say you have in a class of about 18 to 20 children. 5 of them are disruptive. They can't, they can't concentrate. They're having difficulty getting into the sort of learning groove.
Yeah. Hypothetically,
a teacher comes up with a color coding sort of strategy in order to retain their interest as well as convey a certain exercise.
Yeah.
Now you get to the, and it's working. She's noticing that the students are enjoying it, they're receptive, and they're focused. Now you get to the issue of scale. How do you scale this idea? How do you get more teachers aware about this being an alternative exercise? Let's say you think really large, state-wise. So you get a bunch of schools in conversation, school leaders, principals, teachers, what have you, and you conduct a statewide sort of gaming conference. Just to get the students interested, excited, happy. You pick a venue, all the students come together, all of the teachers come together who want to participate, school leaders, whatever. And the teacher who's come up with this idea initiates the game, saying these are the color codes, this is what you have to do, you know, it's a timed event, so on and so forth. And then they see, the teachers see how the children are enjoying themselves, being receptive, staying focused, it's a fun exercise. You know, consequentially, the teachers who may show a little bit of hesitation or resistance to alternative practice are then most likely, from my understanding, going to be more receptive and more inclined to adopt maybe a slightly alien concept to them, a different concept, because they're already seeing their students enjoying it, understanding, and you know, they're addressing that with
So it's the idea of a kind of road shows with we've actually done a bit of that actually.
like a show and tell.
Yeah, it seems to work quite well actually. I did getting teachers together and almost doing some exhibition booths, getting some ideas out. Okay, other ideas? Yeah.
Well, once you know, we have the case study, we can quantify what results, you know, that it does show improvement. We can first start with training teachers, right? Once that goes forward, we can take it. I mean, I was just you know, concentrating all those three, you know, from NGO, peer, and training. So once we have trained teachers, we can share those ideas online, get it through larger scales, and once those ideas work and there's actually result oriented, then we can go up to NGOs and say, well, this has worked in our schools. Why not you try this model and, you know, work with that? And I mean, those three would be really, you know, together, bringing in the scale and, you know, bringing it further.
Great, it's like a sequence, you prove it and you get it scaled up. So I think one of the issues we're having actually is just with online, because our teachers really aren't that internet. But there could be other ways of doing it, as you said, and bubble it up to mobile or something else we could try. Okay, good idea. Other suggestions? So just, was this a helpful framework to think about scale through partnerships? So just, how many of you guys are working on an idea or initiative that needs scale? The scale is somehow important to achieving impact. Most people. Okay, so just using the same framework, just for a couple of minutes, how would you adapt this framework to your own particular context? How could you use one of these pathways to get your own idea or initiative or project, organization scaled up? Yeah, 2 minutes.
And just if you don't have a particular sort of one idea in mind, think about something you're doing in your classroom. Even how could you get that just to the other teachers within your school, or your school and the school next door, which is the start of getting something to scale.
things, just before we jump into a couple of examples, a good question was raised by a couple of groups, so that the difference between social entrepreneurship and NGO scale-up. So just the difference is, social entrepreneurship, we're seeing a new organization gets started up. It could be an NGO, it could be a social business, whatever. NGO scale-up is you work with a Pratham, a Bharti, they already have scale and you're embedding it that way. Two very valid routes to look at things. Okay, any examples to share about their initiative or idea?
I'm involved tenuously with a maths curriculum in the UK, which they've piloted in schools, and they've done a benchmark, so they've got clear data that shows that it's more effective, and that's what's been enabled. So it took a while because you have to get that data from the schools, but now it will scale quickly because everybody can see that, and they've got video of it being used. So that's, and we were just saying it's word of mouth, networks.
So you rely literally on putting it out there for teachers, putting it on a website or other kind of online platform.
But having good evaluation and robust data, so bringing in an external university partner to evaluate a programme. So people will...
Yeah, and I should have said actually, so the way we're doing this within STIR actually, it's a really good point actually. We have we think about 20% of our innovations, they'll be worth actually doing proper randomized trials on. So we want to also conclude the research based on what works in global education. And you might have heard of JPAL at MIT, so Poverty Action Lab, they're working with us on that. And we're taking, so it won't be all the ideas away, they're costly things to do, but some of them are really worth looking at in their own right and testing properly. What's interesting with education and medicine, for example, is that in medicine you have, the doctor comes up with a really good idea in the hospital. There's a way for it to go then to a local teaching hospital, then gets into journals to be published, and then it becomes a standard practice and put through the medical training institutes, for example. They've got a beautiful system for how innovation comes up and bubbles up and is then disseminated. Education is much more messy, you don't have that infrastructure. So we're trying to create a little bit of infrastructure here through partnerships.
And more and more, I'm not sure what it's like in other countries, but more and more, if you are seeking funding, you need to put the data on the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both private and public funding.
So it's very important evaluation is certainly going to be important for many ideas actually. The ones that don't need evaluation, they actually don't cost a lot. So most of these ideas actually are pretty much free in a direct sense. It actually helps us get them spread into some people's points.
Any other people want to share? In which case, I'm going to pick up on the point about sort of evaluating something, sharing the knowledge of it, and hoping that it's going to get to scale. So our other approach with STIR, which we're just developing at the moment, is to try to achieve scale through creating networks of teachers who will receive the innovations that we identify, work together to support each other to actually implement them, discuss how that's going, and then hopefully over time also to develop confidence, create their own innovation. And I think the reason we moved towards this as a really key idea for scaling is that there's a distinction, I think, between motivation to do something and volition, or actual willpower. So I think you would probably all have experienced something where you go along to a training and you come away and you're really inspired because you've seen 20 really cool things that you're going to do in your classroom. But then Monday morning hits you and all of your 8th grade students are crowding around you, and that precious bit of planning time that you needed in order to actually get this new idea into your classroom is gone. And so then you sort of gradually forget about it and you're back into your usual practice. And that's a very sort of human, natural thing, even if you're very motivated. And then of course there are a lot of teachers who aren't even that motivated. So what we're trying to do with our STIR networks of teachers is invite all teachers who submit ideas to STIR, that share their ideas with us. We're now going to also join them, invite them to join a STIR network of teachers, which will organise into groups of around 50 teachers. and who will support with a sort of STIR network leader, who will actually work with them, meeting every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks as a group. Probably that 50 will be broken down into smaller groups, to really think through what are the challenges that you're facing in your classroom, what is it you want to overcome, and getting a discussion going with them about their ideas for overcoming that. Then saying to them, right, here are some of the micro innovations that we've identified that might help you to do that. Then working with them, again, as a group, getting them planning together, what are we going to do in the next couple of weeks to actually get this implemented in our school? Very concrete steps that they can all agree to take together, so they hold each other to account to do it. Hopefully by the next meeting they come back, they try it, they reflect, they discuss what's gone well, what would they tweak to make that innovation work in their context. And then over time, basically support each other to implement it. Because I think that it's very, very rare to find a school anywhere in the world, in my experience, where there are really good sort of supportive communities of teachers available to meet and actually work through, provide each other with the support needed to do something a bit different, to take a bit of a risk, to trial a new approach. And so what we're trying to say is, you might not have that in your school, especially in India, where, as from what I've seen, it's quite likely in a lot of schools there might just be 1 or 2 teachers who are motivated, and there's not a lot of support around them. So we're trying to create that support outside of their school, but in the local community. Our aim is to get to a network of around 3,300 schools or teachers, sorry, by 2015. And we're starting from 300. So these are the guys who have applied to STIR this year. But we're also doing a bit of a combination between our networks approach and our partners approach. So what we're trying to remain a very small organisation, to be as leveraged as we can. So we're also asking our partners to run STIR networks, to use our methodology, and say, if you've contributed ideas, or you've already got a pre-existing network of schools, how about you use this framework as well to get a discussion going? And our very strong hope, and what we've seen through this year, even with the small group of teachers we've worked with during our pilot, is the experience of bringing them together on a monthly basis, giving them an opportunity to discuss, to share. And actually we were doing this almost in some ways accidentally this year. We had a bit more of a sort of formal training agenda, which we think hasn't worked as well as we might have hoped. But just the chance to get teachers together, we've seen a huge shift in some of the teachers we work with in terms of their mindset. And that's this is sort of leading back to the human type of scaling. Actually, if you want people to try new ideas, you have to create the right mindset that they believe they can actually make something happen in their school. And that if they have an idea, it's not just going to stay in their classroom. It's a great idea. There's somewhere for it to go. And I think ideally what we want our teachers, and I think we sort of believe all teachers should see themselves as people who are working for the system as well as just for their own classroom. Of course, as a teacher, your primary responsibility is for the children in your classroom. But you should also see your job as any knowledge that you have, that you're gaining, should be available to share to improve the education system as a whole. And we're trying to create that ecosystem at the moment. So, thinking again about your innovations, your ideas that you might have, how could you create a network to support your idea to get to scale, to be shared? How would you go about using a network approach to scale to spread your idea? So again, about 3 or 4 minutes to discuss that in your threes. Wants to share an idea of how they could use networks to scale an initiative or an idea? It'd be great to hear from some people who haven't maybe spoken yet. Yes?
Quite, it kind of goes off the narrative from the previous session about the fishermen and the project. So I've been thinking about a coaching model for teachers very much based on the program managers and the leadership development officers that we have as Teach First in the UK or Teach for whichever country it is. And at first, my friends and I thought, okay, we could deliver the coaching model ourselves, essentially as LDOs for normal teachers. But in actual fact, in terms of like network and scaling, it might be useful to develop a coaching model that you therefore give to teachers to be able to coach within their schools, as opposed to us saying we'll be the coaches.
Yeah, sort of train the trainer, sort of much more waterfall style approach. Yeah, that's nice. Any others? Yes.
We were talking about the issue they have in Teach for Australia, which is actually one of the same that we have in Spain, is how to create change not only in classroom level, but at school level, how to get the other teachers also to take part of the movement. And one of the solutions that they've come up with in Spain to scale this is they offer the tutors, also tutor teachers at the other school, for example. They give teacher training for teachers who are not part of the program.
Okay, so anybody who's part of the organisation has a sort of responsibility that they'll also share that with the other teachers in that school. Is that correct?
I think it's more explicit because the tutors would normally look after the teacher staying with teachers, but now they're also offering the same support to other new teachers, I assume. Is it in what
No, they're also teachers who have maybe 10 years experience, but they have a specific issue and they get support.
They get the coaching.
Yeah, I think that's really clever. I think what that raises a really important point about if there is some channel where you can kind of piggyback on that try to do that as much as possible because it saves a lot of time. So if a tutor's already going into school, yes, how else can they be used to help that school besides just those sort of one or two people? Thank you. Yeah.
So I run an organization called Rate Difference. We are teaching about 6,000 children across 23 cities in India, using volunteers primarily. And we've got 100 centers. So what we've been able to do is we've got 3 layers. One is our small student is the center. then there's a city, which is an aggregation of a few centers, and then there's a region, which is an aggregation of a few cities, correct? So the teachers in a center meet on a weekly basis, 1 hour before the classroom, to share best practices and sort of, new ideas, etc. So that's the network effect over there. Then teachers of a city meet once a month, right? And then teachers per region meet once a quarter. So effectively all the ideas are getting bubbled up and being shared during these network meetings, right? And that has proven very effective for us. And in parallel, what we've done is provided that the go-to people, whether as mentors or as a project head in the city, right? For which, on a sort of sporadic doubt clearing basis, right? So through this, we've been able to really sort of scale up our ideas across the country.
That sounds great. A really good sort of structure for the network as well.
Yeah.
So thank you. Just before we sort of pass on to the last thing about the platform, just a couple of other observations about networks, which I think are really important. One is that if you go for this approach, I think you have to be very aware that you're not going to be able to control everything, and you really need to embrace that. So what we're trying to do with our networks is say, we've got these innovations, and we want to get them to scale, but our ideal actually is that they get into the networks and they get adapted, they get improved, they get built on. That we're not trying to then police, are you doing this exactly as we say so? Because obviously the whole idea of a network is that you get the benefits of the network, the connections that will happen, the improvements that will happen organically. So I think that's one thing. If you really want to control everything, then probably a network isn't the approach for you. But the second, I think, and we're just working, and we'll maybe say a little more about it at the moment, on how we also measure the impact of a network. Because though you can't control everything, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to understand the impact of it. It's very easy, it's quite tempting just to say, oh, it's just a network, it's just happening, and not actually try to understand if it's doing any good. So getting that balance, I think, is quite tricky, but I think quite important, and we'll talk a little more about that at the end of the presentation.
I wonder if there's anything to say about the extent to which you have to mandate a network, certainly at the start. I mean, Teach First certainly do it with us. You don't get your credits, you don't qualify, and we wouldn't go to the events that they put on if that wasn't the case. But then it turns you into someone. It's the same with kids. I think when you start out, it's quite valuable to put some kind of incentive in place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's basically going through some kind of experience together and then joining a network is a very helpful way to build commitment to a network. I also believe that a network can't be a network for a network's sake. So actually it has to be focused on achieving something. Equally, that I think with the Teach First example is that there's probably a lot more going on in that Teach First network than Teach First know about, and that's also great. So yeah, everyone can go through an experience and you want to measure it, but you also need to kind of let that just happen organically as well. So looking at the clock, we should probably move on.
So just the final thought, which actually leads quite nicely on from incentives. I think just thinking about platforms actually. So when someone said actually, a lot of people have actually, it's one of the classic things of being an entrepreneur is that you learn what you are by other people as much as you are by yourself. So people started describing it as a platform. And I resisted initially because first of all there's a training platform, of course, which we're not trying to be. In India especially there's an IT platform, which is what most people mean. And as I mentioned before, the problem we've got is that most of our teachers are not online. It would be very easy, frankly, if it was very straightforward, just put ideas up there, let teacher pick them up off the web or some way as well. We've got to be a bit more creative. But I think what we're trying to rethink of ourselves more and more now is a platform that brings essentially innovators, grassroots innovators, teachers and principals, and connects them directly with large-scale implementers. So, large foundations, NGOs, government, etc. It's really rich. So it has all these interfaces, these networks that actually bring all these people together. So we're bringing together 40 partners on next Monday together in a room to discuss lots of aspects of scaling, for example. We're bringing about 300 teachers on Sunday, next Sunday, thank God, together to actually discuss and build a network as well. And I think it was really powerful in incentives. I think we do need to have incentives to oil the system. There needs to be self-motivation, and we're targeting self-motivated teachers initially, but there still needs to be something to keep them going. So one of the ideas that our team members had actually was about points, for example. Should we give people points for attending sessions, for if you put an idea in practice, more importantly, you get points. We get impact from that. So just small incentives I think make a big difference. We're trying to avoid money. But we're talking to people like some teacher training colleges in the UK, in India, who might give a diploma, for example. So if you finish and complete and actually do something in your school as a result of being part of that, you're rewarded in terms of that. We've started to put plaques on the schools, which have got a Stir Innovative School for this year. Again, a very powerful incentive for schools to get involved. It's trying to find small incentives that can make that work. The other thing that's really exciting is that we're trying to build what we're calling a creative community. We're India's largest creative community of teachers. There isn't a community that's an easy claim to make, but we are trying to get this to a real scale across the country. And what we need, though, as part of that is a system of partners. So we think we can help schools up to a certain point. We can give innovations and suggest things, help them adapt them, take ideas from them. But we have so many partners around the country now who are doing great work in phonics and literacy and numeracy, behavior management, etc. So can we connect them, those schools, to those partners so they can actually benefit further beyond us as well? So that's what we're talking about as a platform. And it's a horrible diagram, but I'll share it anyway. But just this idea of actually thinking about our mechanism as 4 stages. So we search for ideas, we select them rigorously. They go through what we call market readiness, so some of them get evaluated, once we were making. We actually get partners to improve on the ideas further. And then finally we take them to scale through partners and through networks also. So just maybe a couple of minutes of final thoughts. Maybe, actually, or just any questions on the platform piece, maybe just more broadly. Has anyone thought about what they're doing as being platform-like or like a platform? Is this a helpful concept in education, first of all? Yeah.
Just a question really. Does this not rely on you, rather when you say governments and organisations, do you really mean individual key people within those? I mean, how many people are actually consulted, if you see what I mean? Are you relying on those people to speak for the whole of an organisation?
Yeah. It's a very good and different question. So I think one is that we do need these champions actually. So that's very important to be able to engage individuals, and leadership in these organisations is very important. We want to keep very lean, so we want to stay at about 30, not stay grow actually, but stay at about 30 staff in India over the next 3 years. We can't do this by having a very heavy organisation that way. But when we do need a lot of infrastructure help to build relationships, we've got great partners. So people with governance system, which you need a lot of resources to deal with, basically, to manage. Most of our partners do that day in, day out. They work in hundreds of thousands of schools across the country, or tens of thousands of schools across the country. Why can't we use them as a channel? Now, hence the idea of opening this up to them, so they can do that work with us or for us. Really.
I think it's worth stressing though the time partnership management takes. It really takes a lot of effort and a lot of thought and a lot of time to do it well.
Other thoughts on the platform?
Can I just add a clarifying question? In my head, platform comes across as that Stir is like a conduit. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that we asked our partners very honestly, sort of a year after, what do you think of us? How do you think of us? And they said, what you guys are great at doing is you're great at brokering, catalyzing. You're not implementers, you're not trying to do anything to stay well away from that. So we're trying to really avoid becoming. There's so many great organizations doing great work on the ground in India, across the country. There's no point, we don't think there's much point, we don't add much from replicating that. But if we can try to connect all these pieces together, that's a useful thing that we're trying to do, we think. Other thoughts on the platform?
Just when you said about collaborating with the governments, I just wanted to ask exactly how those partnerships, as you said, I mean, it's tough, working with the government, how those partnerships were taking you forward, how you think about that.
So maybe just give an example of Alice's idea. I actually never asked what we actually did ourselves. So one thing I should probably just use that as an example. So one thing we're doing actually, hopefully with Teach for India, is seeing if we can use that technique with their fellows and alumni. So we know, for example, teachers transition from a school, they hand over to them a Teach for India fellow. This case study approach could, for example, be a really cool tool for them to use that way. So that's one example. We've actually gone to HRD, the ministry here, and the government, I don't know how many people know, but they're actually mandating now 20 days of teaching time per professional development time per teacher. It's about 80, 90 million person days a year. We know much of that time is not very well used. It's usually chalk and talk, poor quality training. So could this idea be integrated into that? Now, we've had a discussion, they're very excited, but a long way to actually implement that. But it's interesting to see we can try and really have the most leverage if we need to. Another way of working with the government system is running networks of government schools as well. And again, I think we need partners to help us do that. So we're talking actually, for example, to Teach for India, to large NGOs to say, could you run innovation networks in your own schools in the government system? In fact, they can run almost their own version of STIR that we can just help support them in doing. So we're trying to find the maximum point of leverage every time in doing that. Does that make sense? Yeah? Other questions? So maybe just going back to my original sort of starting point. Scale is a big issue in India and globally actually. Most things work at a small scale, very few things work at scale. And it frustrates policymakers, education reformers hugely. There are three sort of basic methods, so partnerships, networks and platforms. We asked the question earlier about, do you believe in the human side and the mechanistic side? What do you think STIR is trying to do between these two approaches? Combine any other thoughts? Anyone agree, disagree? Yeah, I think we're trying to have we're trying to see what works. We don't know until we really try this at scale. So we're hoping by trying these two things simultaneously, we'll find points of traction in both approaches and using these three methods very flexibly to get us to that point. One of the big things around measurement, I think we're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah, and just before talking about measurement, I think at every sort of size, if you like, or even within STIR's scale, we're trying to try out different approaches. So we've got our overall approach where we're doing the partnership network. But even with our individual micro-innovations, when we're sharing those, we're trying to recognise both the mechanistic and the human scale. So we've created these scale-up guides, which have within them both a sort of step-by-step guide, how you would do this if you wanted to do it exactly the same as Innovate has, but also combine lots of questions about how could you adapt this for your context, how might you change it, how could you improve it, or simply how else could you approach solving this problem that this micro-innovation is trying to develop. And I think the more levels at which you can speak to people, then the better in that regard. Final point on measurement, as we were saying, measurement is really crucial if you want to get to scale, and that's something that we're very aware of with STIR as well. So we're trying to measure a few key things. The first is the impact of certain individual micro-innovations. So when a partner takes those, embeds them in a program, we'll also find JPAL or another evaluation partner to do a very rigorous impact evaluation of does that individual innovation make a difference. The second approach is we're trying to understand the effect or the impact of being part of STIR on a teacher's mindset. So if you come along to one of our conferences where we'll search for innovations and share an idea and then join a STIR network, over time, does that actually help you see yourself as a teacher in a different way? And we're working with a professor at Columbia University in New York, who's a psychologist there, who's helping us to do a big study on sort of teacher mindset throughout that process. And then our longer term ambition is to really measure whether schools within STIR networks, or teachers who are within STIR networks, are able to have bigger impact and get better results than similar teachers, or teachers working in similar schools who are not in STIR networks. And really, we're very, very conscious that if we don't get these measures in place, our chances of continuing to get funding and support are very limited. So I think a sort of robust evaluation plan is really important for scale, as someone said earlier.
So, I think we've covered most things. Are there any final questions you want to raise? Yes.
Could you give a case study in India about micro-innovation that has scaled up to platform?
Yeah, so I mean, we're first of all 5 months in after finding innovation, so it's very early, but just to give a simple example, one of the student letterbox I mentioned, for example, It's been taken up with a lot of the schools in our network already. We've got 10 schools, and the Banki Foundation, they're one of the large school operators in India, actually embedded that in their school operating manual. They run about 300 schools in India. So that's been a very successful example of a scale-up mechanism through an NGO partnership and also through just organic peer sharing as well. So we're finding lots of these. We're hoping to have many, many more of the months to come. But it's good to see these very small initial wins in that regard also. But these things take a little bit of time to also get through, and partnerships take time as well as the learning.
And actually, it reminds me of another key point, which is you can be lulled into a sense that you're at much greater scale than you are. And I think we've probably, as teachers, all been sent posters to put on your wall about, like, I don't know, citizenship or something. And that's on your classroom wall, and therefore you take, like, scale. We're in X thousand schools. Now, if the teacher just puts that up, never refers to it, doesn't teach the program that goes alongside it, I don't think you can really count that as scale. And so I think there's kind of constant vigilance needed, not to get into the game of simply counting numbers of teachers that have been sent something or exposed to something, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's actually happening.
So just going to close up by asking, perhaps just to close up, I think you have one thing, maybe just with your groups, just one thing you might do to try and get one more point of leverage in a way. So if you're in a classroom, how can you get other classrooms to try and adopt something you're doing? If you're an organization, help other ones. Is there something you can do using one of these tools from today that you take forward in your own organization, classroom, school, whatever the right unit is? Okay, just two final minutes. Does that make sense? So just one action you can take forward using one of these approaches in your own work. Try and get your ideas to more scale. So any thoughts on how you could use one of these sorts of techniques to try and get more shape?
Yeah, we were talking about a number of things. I like the idea of this, validating work. Yeah. Because I'm just envisaging the problems of people buying into ideas and spreading them. Yeah. I think if there was a clear worth to an idea, either, like you say, through impact studies or other means, I think that would be really valuable. Yeah.
So just on that, I would urge you all, if you want to try and test something in your school, the Education Endowment Foundation in the UK has a very good DIY evaluation guide, trying to encourage schools to do sort of little impact evaluations and teachers to run them. It sort of sets out exactly how you might do that. It's called the Education Endowment Foundation, or EEF.
Please use an organisation, a company or NGO for an example, or just one thing you might take forward?
The whole thing is based on
partnerships really with not enough money to do anything else.
Right.
So from the very, very basic level that my NGO takes buses around some area where I work in Gujarat and talks to parents on a one-to-one basis about getting their kids in school, right through to the directors working with as many other NGOs as possible. So I mean, without that, nothing could ever get beyond day one. So yeah, it's just turning that over in our mind as we need to be in a very situation.
Okay, fine. Just one thing I just to close off with, just to say that what's really exciting, I mentioned, I think it was the last session actually, this session, if you want to bring the whole education reform movement together in India, you could probably get most of the key players in one room. In the US and other countries, it was more, now we're putting like 5, 10, 20, maybe 30 rooms nowadays. But I was reading actually a great book about how a lot of the reform happened in the States. Actually, some of the characters, John Schneer, Mike Feinberg, etc., were all key drivers on it, but really it was about 10 committed people pretty much who made it all happen. They built a very strong network. They tried to look at creating at different levels, either by starting a charter school and trying to demonstrate what could be done, at the policy level trying to change some of the enabling policies and mechanistic approach, trying to look at creating reform groups of districts in New Orleans after Katrina happened, for example. So a few quite scattergun approaches actually started off, and they quickly connected with each other and together made that movement happen. And now, if you look on, certainly America hasn't closed its educational gaps, but in terms of the way that politicians think, the way that the government is thinking about policy,